Hello once again. This is the Mondays on Mondays, and we welcome you back to another segment we do every Monday. The focus of what we try and do is based on families with special needs children. The background we have is that I have a son who was congenital diaphragmatic hernia, and that was undiagnosed until birth. And then his sister, who was born a couple of years after him and at the age of 18 months, was diagnosed with aplastic anemia, which required a bone marrow transplant. So between it, we've had quite a bit of unique family dynamics involved. And what we do is meet once a week to discuss just general topics, a lot of what we pick up off of the social media interaction that we get. We also have an email address that you'll see in this viewing, and that'll be available to you. But I go by the CDH Dad, so welcome back once again.
And I want to just bring perspective. We'll do our standard disclaimer as well, but perspective. CDH is 1 in 4,000, and aplastic anemia in a child under 2 is 1 in 2.5 million. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Right. And
we're talking about extremely
rare.
rare.
Very extreme. Well, CDH is
CDH is common.
much more common than
4,000.
most people realize. And that's part of the reason that we do this, is for the awareness of it is if you think about it, you may know about 1 in 3,000 people. It's kind of that six degrees of Kevin Bacon. We all in some way know a lot of different people.
Yep.
Over between our interactions. But also, as was mentioned, we have a disclaimer that we are not medical professionals. We don't have a background in psychology, sociology, any of those things. But we do have 3 decades of experience in having to live a life that's a little bit different from what people consider to be the normal. So that's the reason that we want to do these discussions. So once again, we thank you for joining us.
With that, let's roll the title.
Okay, and welcome back once again. Just in general, our topic for this week is going to be, how do you handle a normal life and normal childhood interactions with a special needs child?
Yeah.
And part of this came about is I was going through some papers that we had through the years, just trying to clear out some old stuff, and actually came across some of his stuff from preschool, where he was involved there. But I thought, okay, it's probably a good topic to discuss. How do you try and be as normal in your social interactions with your child when they have some unique and special issues, and some of the difficulties that you have in that? It's when you've got a child that's having to have a kangaroo pump and the sat monitors and oxygen tubes and central lines and some of the other things that go along with some of those situations with a child that's got congenital diaphragmatic hernia and is in the recovery phases of that, or whatever the other issues may be. It's difficult to do some of the normal activities, and it's also difficult to deal with some of the questions and issues that you end up with in the normal world. So I'm going to bring up some just general items. And some of this, I've mentioned that in the past, that one of the things when you've got a child that's got special needs is working with your state and local early childhood intervention programs, because a lot of these will provide you capabilities to find therapists and medical professionals and people that can help you quickly determine if there are problems, address those problems, and try and get those things corrected. Now, in our case, it was one that the community we were in, we were able to get to know some and get contacts through the hospital, because they made contacts at the local level and got us involved with some therapists. And I'll be honest, the first set of therapists that we had did not work out well for us. They had a program that they were using that was more for a Downs and sensory averse child, and that was not necessarily the case that we had, because sometimes you're going to have local medical professionals and therapists who are not familiar with what to do in these types of situations. Interestingly enough, what we found was that in the local area where we were in Florida was a United Cerebral Palsy Center, which had a therapy and development program for children with special needs, not just cerebral palsy, but many other issues. And that gave us the opportunity to get involved in a social network that helped my son interact with other people and other children, not necessarily with the same conditions, but with similar type situations, so that it was as normal as abnormal could be. So we went in, I think it was 2 or 3 times a week for therapy sessions, and what they would do is have individual therapy. Our occupational therapist, we had a physical therapist and a speech therapist involved in a lot of these things. But they would do individual interaction in a group setting where they were working with, the therapists were working with other children within the same area, and a lot of normal childhood nursery school type activities, as normal as they could be. So that helped with that interaction and that capability. So if you have that opportunity, take advantage of that. The other thing is you look at your local social group, the people in your neighborhood, the people that you know through churches, whatever your interactions may be, and what capabilities do you have to interact on that? Now, in the early days, we were in a neighborhood, we didn't have a lot of young families and children nearby. So that's where the United Cerebral Palsy Center and the therapy there helped tremendously, because that way we could deal. But that was up until about 2 years of age. But in the midst of that, we also developed other friendships. Another family that had a child that basically was missing a chamber in his heart, and had the developmental and the medical issues involved with that, and we became close friends with them. They had 4 kids total, but it gave us someone else to interact with that kind of had similar type understandings, and we would go out and do normal activities. We could go to the playground, we could go to a lot of different places, and as a group be able to work within our small group, but then also in the playground setting with other children. So those types of things help. It's also, we became good friends with a child who came into the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit, soon after my son got off of ECMO, and this was the next child that was going to be on ECMO. He actually had a respiratory issue that needed to be resolved and needed the ECMO. But we became friends with them, and even though they lived, 4 or 5 hours away, we made a point on, long weekends when we had the opportunity to meet with them and interact with them. So over a number of years, we interacted with these other families that had special needs children, but also had normal children. And then we had my daughter, who was everything fairly typical up until 18 months of age. So you try and work on some of those things as best you can. You're going to run into some difficulties with this, because I know, some of the problems that we had were people that did not quite fully understand having to deal with a child that could not be put in what they considered normal positions. Yeah. I know we were members at a church, and we come in with my son in a stroller with the oxygen, the pump, the monitors, and those type things. And there is some annoyance with some noise, some of the noises and items going on there. And then you've got a normal, child who's going to make noises. So there were actually people that would come to us and say, well, you could put that child in the nursery. We do have that available. And trying to explain to them that, no, we couldn't, because their nursery workers did not really understand what to do in case of a severe situation or a difficulty there. So sometimes there are people who don't understand that, if you really look at the statistics for children that are born, it's a very special situation if you have a child that is, quote, normal, because there are a lot of various difficulties that come into play. I mean, that's,
Well, I want to bring this up, kind of jumping off your comment. Part of it is the older generation that really didn't understand, and some of it gets to the point that there are people from a generation before me that, quite honestly, don't care. In terms of that, some of it can be educated, like ignorance can be educated, but there's a point that you can't, as the old phrase goes, ignorance can be educated, but you can't fix stupid.
Yeah.
I hate to use it that way, but the older generation doesn't.
It does, and it's also one, I mean, our society has changed through the years. I know I'm an older parent, but in the time that I was in school, we did not have many special needs children in our school systems, because the way the system was run at that time is a lot of these children were institutionalized or kept in special schools or special facilities, so that they weren't in with the mainstream situation. Now, I did have a good friend when I was in middle school and high school who was a CP, a cerebral palsy child, and had the motor difficulties and things like that. But he was also part of our school system, and we became friends. We talked and interact, and he actually went on and made a good career in his life. So now a lot of this is more mainstreamed, that you do have children with cerebral palsy. You do have children that are autistic, even some children that are Down syndrome, and other issues that you have to deal with. Some of it's not necessarily physically visible, because if you've got a child that has a heart problem, or a CDH child, or someone that's been through multiple surgeries and issues, you're not necessarily going to see those situations with those children, but it is something that needs to be discussed and addressed. And I know we did have a situation when you were starting one of the preschool programs of, we don't want him to talk about these things. And that was difficult. We actually had to talk with the instructor and things like that to say, he wants to tell people about what he's been through and some of the scars and some of the issues there. But it's also one that other kids are going to have these same type
They're gonna.
questions.
Mhm.
So that does come into play. The other thing is getting involved with, your neighbors and things like that. I know at about 2 years old, we moved to a neighborhood where there were a number of children similar age. So within a couple of years of your age and your sister's age.
I was
So
thinking
there
just in the circle, the Wilsons were down the street.
Yeah.
The Wallaces were down the street. Behind us were Kirkpatrick's and
The Threkells, yeah. Clemens,
Kathy Clemens was
yeah.
the other direction down the street.
Yeah, so that was in a normal neighborhood with families with similar age children.
Yeah.
And we worked towards trying to mainstream along that. We did still have to have therapy because between your therapies that were required and the seizure disorder and some of the things we were dealing with there, and then your sister with the bone marrow transplant and the therapies that were involved to get her back
And
into
just trying to get her back to normal.
the normal, were things that we had to go through. We were fortunate that we had neighbors, kids, and families that, we were able to interact with and be generally normal in a lot of those activities. But one of the things that did come into play, and one of the things I just wanted to discuss is, we talked about you're going into preschool program.
Yeah.
But in that case, we had to delay the preschool program because as he was at the age to go into preschool,
Was when Mary was getting sick.
my daughter was sick and was immunocompromised after the bone marrow transplant, which meant that we had to avoid having my son pick up something from other kids in a normal preschool setting and bringing it back to his sister. So we ended up having to delay half a year. You're going into a preschool program.
Yeah.
We were fortunate. The teacher with that was very understanding. We were able to work with her and get you were pretty much up to speed with the other kids in that group. And these are, in some cases, kids that you had met through the neighborhood and some other interaction. And then these are friends that you made in preschool that became friends that stayed for, until now. That you're still in communication with many of those.
2 friends that I'd done the math that I would have literally gone from pre-K through high school had I stayed in Georgia, through high school graduation with them.
Yeah.
And had at least one class with them.
Yeah. So these are the type things that, as parents you need to consider. How can you best work to, as closely as you can, mainstream your child, even though they have special medical needs or physical needs or other issues, but still try and keep that into a normal childhood setting. And it's one that I consider, is really necessary because I have watched, we won't go into the details, but I know we interacted with some other families that had special needs children, and they basically tried to get them involved but keep them separate.
Yeah.
And work through special needs that they expected for their child. And it's sometimes one of, you've got to go through some of the real life type situations of, there are going to be ups and downs. There are going to be problems. There are going to be things that you're going through. You don't want to do anything that's going to physically or emotionally hurt your child. But it's also one that you need to be able to work through. Okay, there are struggles, there are challenges, there are things that, if you're in with a scout group or something like that, that your child needs to try as best they can to take the hike up that hill. If they have problems, then the leaders should be able to work with them and provide some assistance. But it's one of, you need to be able to learn to struggle and make that next level of achievement in those things if it's within your physical capabilities.
Yeah.
Now, if you've got respiratory, heart issues, things like that, that becomes a difficulty. I know in your case, it was one we had a difficulty with swimming, which was going to make it difficult with the scouting program. But we worked with the leaders and we managed to find a way around that.
Yeah.
So, these are the type of things that as parents you're going to try and work with is, how do you work to get your child into the normal mainstream of activities, the things that children need to do so that they can achieve and grow and develop and become normal in the real world. And I'm not going to say that we've been perfect at it. There have been a lot of ups and downs and issues and things like that with two children with these type of things. But at this point, both children educated, have been into school programs, back into school programs again, working in the real world. So, now you get to a point where it's the normal challenges for any parent and child, no matter what the situation is. How do you help your child achieve for the long term so that they are able to grow and develop and become very successful adults? So that was part of the topic that we just wanted to discuss here. I know I don't want to go too long. We may be able to carry this over into another session, I believe.
Taken into next week as well.
Yeah.
But I think that pretty much sums it up.
Okay.
So
I think we did very well. So thank you once again for... Go ahead.
For the CDH Warrior?
And the CDH Dad. Thank you for joining us once again for Mondays on Mondays.
Have a great day. See you next time.